Kyla had no idea that the stranger lurking in the corner booth was the Alpha King. She didn't know he'd spent 3 grueling nights tracking her every move, weighing if she was the salvation he sought or just another ghost in the dark. And she certainly didn't know that pouring him one final drink would ignite the secrets she had spent a lifetime burying. All she knew was that if she didn't shutter the taproom in 10 minutes, old Roger would slash her wages, and she couldn't afford to lose a single copper. The last of the drunks had stumbled out an hour ago, leaving behind a graveyard of sticky ale rings and the sour, lingering stench of cheap spirits. Kyla worked with mechanical precision, her spine screaming after 12 hours on her feet. The crescent moon wasn't a palace, it was a squat, timber-framed tavern wedged between the stench of a tannery and a candlemaker's shop. But it was her sanctuary. She knew every splintered floorboard, every jagged crack in the plaster, and every regular's vice. She was wringing out her rag when the sound shattered the silence. The soft, deliberate scrape of wood against stone. Kyla's head snapped up. The corner booth, the one she had scrubbed 20 minutes ago, was no longer empty. A man sat swallowed by the shadows. He was so motionless she might have mistaken him for a trick of the flickering lamplight, if not for his eyes. Even from across the room, they seized what little light remained, reflecting it back with the predatory gold of an animal. Her pulse hammered against her throat. The door was locked. She had slid the iron bolt home with her own hands, which meant he had been there the entire time, watching her work in absolute, haunting silence. "We're closed," Kyla said, forcing her voice to remain a steady blade. She had fended off enough aggressive drunks and wandering hands to know that fear was an invitation. "You need to leave." The man didn't flinch. "One last drink." His voice was a low, rough-edged growl, the kind of sound that conjured images of winter storms and the apex predators that prowl in the blackness. "I said we're." "I heard you." He leaned forward, moving into the amber glow of the lamp. Kyla's breath hitched in her chest. He was beautiful in the way dangerous men were beautiful. All sharp angles and controlled power, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a jaw that was impossibly chiseled. But it was his eyes that held her. Storm gray like steel in moonlight and carrying a weight she couldn't name. Exhaustion maybe, or desperation wrapped in iron control. "Please," he said, and that single word made her hesitate. There was no threat in it, no demand, just a simple request. Kayla's first instinct was to refuse, call for the night watch, or grab the club Roger kept behind the bar. Instead, she found herself saying, "What are you drinking?" "Whiskey." "Neat." She moved behind the bar, hyper-aware of his gaze, tracking her movements. Her hands were steady as she poured. She'd done this thousands of times. But something felt different tonight, like the air before a lightning strike. When she brought the glass to his table, he wrapped his fingers around it without drinking, just held it, studying the amber liquid like it contained answers to life's greatest mysteries. She looked at him more closely, the set of his shoulders, the way shadows fell across his face, and recognition sparked. The past 3 nights, always the same corner booth, never causing trouble, never speaking to anyone, just watching her. "You've been here before," Kayla said slowly. The sudden realization sent a shiver down her spine. "Yes, why?" His eyes lifted to hers, and the intensity in them made her want to step back. But she held her ground, meeting his gaze even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm looking for someone," he said finally. "Well, there's no one here but me and you." Something flickered across his face, but it was gone before she could read it. "May I ask you something?" Kayla crossed her arms. "You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer." Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. But not quite. "Fair enough." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Do you ever get impressions from things you touch, images, feelings, memories that aren't yours?" Every instinct Kayla had developed over 26 years of survival screamed at her to lie, to laugh it off as ridiculous, to play the simple barmaid who knew nothing. But something in his expression stopped her. He looked like a man bracing for disappointment, but asking anyway. Hope and defeat whirred in his gray eyes. "Who's asking?" she said softly, lowering her voice. "Someone who needs help finding his sister." He took a drink finally, and when he set the glass down, his hand was steady. "Someone who's been searching for 3 years and is running out of time. There are plenty of trackers in the capital. Bloodhounds even. I've tried them all. My sister isn't lost in a forest or hiding in some village. She was taken by people who know how to disappear. The only chance I have of finding her is through the object she left behind. And for that, I need someone with your particular gift." Kyla's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." He didn't sound accusatory, just certain. "You've been hiding it your whole life, being careful never to let anyone see. Your father taught you well, Kayla." "My father is dead." "I know. I'm sorry." And he sounded like he meant it. But before he died, he made arrangements, called in favors, left messages with people who traffic in useful information. He paused. He wanted to make sure that if you ever needed protection, the right people would know where to find you. Kayla's vision blurred. Her father, in those final fever adult days, had kept asking for parchment and ink. She'd thought he was writing goodbye letters, settling old debts she'd never imagined. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "How do I know you're not someone who'd hurt you for what you can do?" He leaned back, shadows playing across his features. "You don't. You'll have to decide whether to trust me." "That's not a strong argument." "No," he agreed. "But I'm tired of lies, and I suspect you are, too." He reached into his coat and withdrew something small wrapped in dark cloth. When he set it on the table and pulled the fabric away, Kyla saw a ribbon, pale blue silk, stained dark at one end. "Blood. Her name is Serena," he said quietly. 16 years old. She was taken 3 years ago during a raid on our eastern border. This ribbon was in her hair when they dragged her away. His fingers tightened on the glass. "I need to know where she is, if she's still alive." Kayla stared at the ribbon. Even from across the table, she could feel it calling to her. That strange pull she'd learned to ignore, to suppress, to pretend didn't exist. "And if I help you," she said slowly, "what happens to me when people find out what I can do?" "They won't." "I'll make sure of it." "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can." The absolute certainty in his voice made her look up. "Because if anyone tries to hurt you for helping me, they'll answer to the Alpha King." Her world tilted sideways. Kayla had heard the stories. Of course, everyone had. The young king who'd taken the throne after his parents were killed in the same raid that claimed his sister. The one who'd spent 3 years consolidating power with ruthless efficiency. Who negotiated treaties with one hand and executed traitors with the other. They said he was brilliant and brutal in equal measure, that he could smell lies like other men smelled smoke. They also said he had eyes like winter storms. "It's you," she breathed. Dorian inclined his head. "It's me. Why have you been sitting here for 3 nights? You could have just, I don't know, summoned me, ordered me to the castle." "I could have," he agreed. "But I wanted to see you first. See if the information I'd received was accurate. And I wanted you to have a choice." Kyla laughed sharp and bitter. "A choice. The Alpha King asks for help. And I'm supposed to believe I can say no." Something shifted in his expression. She'd braced herself for fury at her refusal. But what she saw instead was something far more disarming. Hurt. Raw and unguarded, flickering across his face before he shuddered it away behind that iron control. "I'm asking, Kayla, not ordering. There's a difference." The vulnerability in his voice, quiet, almost resigned, made her chest ache in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Don't be such a softie, Kayla," she told herself. "He's dangerous." "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Come with me. 7 days, no more. I have items from the raid. Things Serena touched. Things her captors left behind. I need you to read them. Tell me what you see. Help me piece together where they took her. He paused. In exchange, I'll pay your debt to Roger. All of it. And I'll give you enough gold to start over wherever you want. Kyla's heart stuttered. Her debt to Roger was crushing. 600 gold pieces her father had lost in a card game 2 weeks before he died. She'd been working it off for 4 years, barely making a dent in the interest, let alone the principal. With that kind of money, she could leave this place, start fresh somewhere Roger couldn't find her. So after 7 days, I'm free to leave? She asked. Yes, I'll give you my word. His eyes held hers. I won't trap you, Kayla. Whatever you decide, you walk away when it's done. She looked at the ribbon again. Thought about a 16-year-old girl stolen from her home. Thought about her own mother burned alive when Kayla was 8 because someone had seen her predict a neighbor's death and decided she was a witch. Thought about the life she'd been living. Hiding, serving drinks, belonging to Roger in all the ways that mattered, even if the law called it employment. 7 days, she said firmly. And then I want the gold and my freedom. You have my word. I want a blood oath. Dorian's eyebrows rose slightly. You don't trust easily. I've learned not to. He pulled a knife from his belt, a beautiful thing. The hilt wrapped in leather, the blade etched with symbols she didn't recognize. Without hesitation, he drew it across his palm. Blood welled up, dark in the lamplight. He offered his hand. Kayla took the knife with shaking fingers and made her own shallow cut. The pain was sharp, immediate. When she pressed her palm to his, she felt it. A shock of recognition that went bone deep, like her body had somehow been waiting for this contact her entire life. Magic flared between them, sealing the oath. But beneath it, wrapped around it, she felt something else. Something that made her skin prickle and her breath catch. A bond. The kind her mother had told her about in whispered bedtime stories. The kind that only happened once in a lifetime if you were lucky or cursed. Dorian's hand tightened on hers, his eyes widening slightly. Did he feel that too? Neither of them spoke. After a moment that stretched too long, he released her hand and pulled a clean cloth from his pocket, tearing it in half. He offered her a piece first, waiting until she took it before wrapping his own palm. His movements deliberate and controlled. Their fingers had brushed as she took the cloth, and that spark flared again, smaller this time, but no less electric. Tomorrow, he said, his voice rougher than before. I'll send someone to collect you at dawn. I have a shift, Kayla. He stood and she realized just how tall he was, how much space he took up, even when he was trying not to be intimidating. Let me worry about Roger. You just be ready. He left the way he must have entered through the back door that she definitely remembered locking and disappeared into the night. Kayla stood in the empty tap room, staring at her bandaged palm, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. Dawn came too quickly. Kyla had barely slept, her mind spinning through possibilities and fears. She'd packed her few belongings, 2 dresses, a comb that had been her mother's, a book of pressed flowers her father had made, and sat by her window, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pale pink. The knock, when it came, was professional. She opened the door to find a man in dark leathers, his expression neutral. Miss Kayla, I'm Rafe. His Majesty sent me to escort you. I need to tell Roger. Already handled. Rafe's tone was respectful but final. Your wages have been paid through the month and your debt has been cleared. You're free to go. Kayla blinked. Just like that. Just like that. She followed Rafe through the waking city, acutely aware of the stares they attracted. She wasn't dressed for travel with royalty, just her usual brown work dress and a patched cloak, but Rafe didn't seem to care. He led her through the merchant quarter, past the grand houses on the hill to where the city walls gave way to forest. 3 horses waited. Rafe mounted one, and a younger man with copper-colored hair took another. The third was midnight black and easily the most beautiful creature Kayla had ever seen. "That's Willow," Rafe said. "She's gentle. Just follow our lead." The ride took 2 hours. They left the road after the first hour, following paths that seemed to exist more in Rafe's memory than in any visible trail. The forest grew denser, older, until Kayla felt like she'd stepped into a different world entirely. Then the trees opened up and she saw it. The castle was carved into the mountain itself, all dark stone and sharp angles with towers that seemed to grow from the rock face. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. The kind of beauty that reminded you it could kill you if you weren't careful. They crossed a bridge over a gorge so deep Kayla couldn't see the bottom. Inside the walls, the castle courtyard bustled with activity. Warriors training, servants hurrying between buildings, children playing near a fountain. Everyone moved with purpose, but there was an ease to it. These people weren't afraid. Rafe led her through corridors lined with tapestries depicting battles and hunts. Finally, he stopped at a heavy oak door. "His Majesty is inside. He's expecting you." Kayla's stomach flipped. She smoothed down her dress pointlessly since it was still wrinkled from travel and knocked. "Come in." She pushed open the door to find Dorian standing by the window, backlit by morning sun. He'd changed since last night. Gone were the nondescript travel clothes, replaced by dark trousers and a linen shirt that did nothing to hide the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was still damp, like he'd recently bathed. When he turned, his eyes found hers immediately. That same intensity from the pub, but somehow softer in daylight. "Kayla, thank you for coming. I gave you my word." He crossed the room, moving with that predator's grace she'd noticed before. "Still, thank you." He gestured to a table where several items lay spread across dark velvet. "These are what I've collected. Things from the raid. From the places we think they held her after. I need you to tell me what you see." Kayla approached slowly. There was the ribbon, of course, but also a torn piece of fabric that might have been from a cloak. A small knife with a carved handle, a button made of bone. Each item seemed to pulse with residual energy, calling to the gift she'd spent so long suppressing. "It's not pleasant," she said. "What I see. Sometimes it's just flashes, colors, emotions, but sometimes it's more like living through someone else's memory. I understand. And it drains me. Leaves me shaky, sometimes sick. I'll be here," Dorian said quietly. "If you need to stop, just say so." Kayla picked up the ribbon first. The moment her fingers closed around the silk, the world dissolved, replaced by a vision. She's running. The forest is dark, and the men behind her are laughing, making a game of the chase. Her hair has come loose from its braid, and the ribbon, her favorite, the one Papa gave her, is slipping. She tries to grab it, but a hand catches her arm, yanks her backward, and she's screaming, but there's no one to hear. Kayla gasped, dropping the ribbon. Dorian caught her elbow, steadying her. "What did you see?" "Forest at night. Men chasing your sister." Kayla's voice shook. She was terrified. Dorian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She picked up the knife next. A room. Stone walls. No windows. She's cold. So cold. And her wrists hurt from the iron cuffs. Someone's talking in the next room. Voices rising, arguing. A man's voice cuts through. "The king will pay anything for her. We just need to wait." Another voice, rougher. "And if he doesn't, then we kill her and leave the body where he'll find it." They held her somewhere with stone walls, Kayla said. Swaying slightly. Underground, maybe. They were planning to ransom her, but they never did. Dorian's voice was tight with controlled fury. I put out word that I'd pay any price, issued pardons, offered land, money. They never made contact. Something must have changed their plan, she whispered. She reached for the fabric next. This one was harder, older, the memories more fragmented. Movement. She's being transported, covered with a rough blanket that smells like horses and mildew. Voices again, but different ones. A woman this time. Lord Shaw wants her moved to the Eastern Estate. Keep her quiet. Keep her hidden. Someone asks, why? The woman laughs, and it's a cruel sound. Because the king has been too distracted searching. Time to make sure he stays that way. Kayla dropped the fabric like it burned her. Lord Shaw, she said, do you know that name? Dorian had gone very still. Yes, he's on my council. One of my father's oldest advisors. He's the one who has her or did have her. Kyla pressed her palm to her forehead, trying to steady herself. They moved her to an Eastern estate. They wanted to keep you distracted. Distracted from what? I'm not sure. I only caught a snippet. Dorian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerous. Shaw has served this kingdom for 40 years. He held me when I was a child. He swore loyalty to my father on his deathbed. I'm just telling you what I saw. I'm not questioning you. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm just trying to understand why. He looked at the remaining items on the table. Can you continue? Give me a moment. Her limbs felt heavy, her head swimming like she'd surfaced too quickly from deep water. The visions always left her hollowed out, wrung dry. But this one had taken more than usual. He poured water from a pitcher, brought it to her. Their fingers brushed when she took the cup, and that spark of recognition flared again. The bond pulling at them both with an insistence that made her breath catch. Dorian stepped back quickly, putting distance between them like it physically hurt him. Take your time. Kayla drank, trying to ignore the way her hand trembled. And whether it was from the vision's aftershocks or from the loss of his touch, she couldn't say. She picked up the button. Different room, better furnished. She's older now. This memory is recent. She can see her reflection in a polished mirror across the room. Her hair is longer, her face thinner, but it's definitely Serena. She's wearing a simple dress, not chains. A woman brings food. The same voice from before. Lord Shaw says you're to be ready by week's end. Serena's voice from disuse. Ready for what? The woman smiles. To go home, dear. Isn't that what you want? She's alive, Kayla breathed. She's alive, and she's at Lord Shaw's estate. They're planning to move her again within the week. Dorian's relief was palpable. You're certain? The memory was recent, days old, maybe. She set down the button carefully. But Dorian, they're not holding her prisoner anymore. At least not visibly. It looked like she was a guest. A guest who can't leave. Dorian paced to the window, his shoulders rigid. If Shaw wanted a ransom, he would have contacted me. If he wanted to kill her, she'd be dead already. So, what's his endgame? Leverage, Kayla proposed quietly. Keep her alive. Keep her hidden. You spend your resources searching, neglecting other threats. And when he's ready, she trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought. When he's ready, he produces her. Dorian's voice was ice. Claims he rescued her, becomes a hero, or he uses her to force concessions. Marriage alliances, land rights, council votes. He turned back to Kayla. Shaw has a son, unmarried, ambitious. If he could force a betrothal between Serena and his son, he'd bind his family to the throne. She finished his thought. Exactly. Kayla felt the last vision draining away, leaving her weak. Her knees buckled and she barely made it to the nearest chair before collapsing into it. Dorian was beside her in an instant, one hand catching her elbow, The other braced against the chair's arm, caging her in without quite touching. "Are you all right?" "Just tired. It takes a lot out of me." She was acutely aware of how close he was. The heat radiating from him, the way his eyes searched her face with great intensity. "Then rest. We'll continue tomorrow." "There are more items tomorrow," he said firmly. But his thumb brushed against the inside of her elbow, so brief she might have imagined it. "You're no good to me if you collapse." There was something in his tone that sounded like genuine concern, raw and unfiltered, like she mattered beyond her usefulness, beyond the 7 days. "Why are you being kind to me?" Kayla asked before she could stop herself. Dorian's expression softened. "Because you're helping me find my sister." You didn't have to say yes. Because he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Because you deserve kindness. But you don't know me. I know you've been hiding your entire life. I know you work yourself to exhaustion, paying off a debt. I know you're brave enough to face your fears when it matters. His eyes held hers. That's enough. The air between them felt charged again, crackling with that invisible pull, that recognition. Kyla's heart hammered as she watched something like desire flicker across his face before he locked it down. The rational part of her wanted to flee the room, but the rest of her wanted to lean in, close the distance. "The bond," she said quietly, forcing the words out. "When we made the oath, did you feel it?" "Yes." "What does it mean?" Dorian was silent for a long moment, and she saw the tension in his shoulders. The way his hands flexed like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "It means you're my mate. Or could be if we both chose it." He held up a hand before she could speak, though she saw it tremble slightly. "But I meant what I said. 7 days and you're free. The bond doesn't change that. You have a choice. So if I choose to walk away, then I'll let you go." The words sounded like they were being torn from him. Each one costing something vital. "It'll hurt like hell, but I'll survive it. I won't trap you, Kayla. Not with duty, not with magic, not with anything." She believed him. That was the terrifying part. That despite every lesson she'd learned about powerful men and their pretty words, she believed Dorian would keep his promise. The certainty of it terrified her. The castle, Kayla discovered, was full of contradictions. From the outside, it looked like a fortress, all harsh stone and defensive positions. But inside there was warmth. Tapestries softened the walls, fires burned in every hearth, and the people moved with an easy familiarity that spoke of family rather than subjects. A woman named Vera showed her to her room, a space larger than her entire living quarters above the pub, with a bed piled high with furs and a window overlooking the mountains. His Majesty said, "You're to have anything you need," Vera said, her weathered face kind. "There's a bath being drawn, and I'll bring up food shortly. You just ring if you need anything else." After Vera left, Kayla sank into the copper tub and let the hot water ease the tension from her muscles. The visions always left her feeling scraped raw, like she'd lived through someone else's trauma and couldn't quite find her way back to herself. She thought about Serena, 16 years old, the same age Kayla had been when her mother died. Old enough to understand fear, too young to have defenses against it. And she thought about Dorian, the way he'd touched her elbow so carefully when she'd swayed, the way he'd promised her freedom even as the bond pulled between them. She'd spent most of her adult life learning to distrust powerful men. Roger had seemed harmless at first, just an old man offering employment to a girl with nowhere else to go. It wasn't until the debt appeared, until the interest started compounding, until she realized she'd never be free, that she understood the trap. But Dorian didn't feel like Roger. He felt dangerous in a different way, not because he'd trap her, but because part of her wanted to stay. Wanted to believe in this dark fairy tale where the king was fierce but kind and the bond was real and she got to be chosen instead of used. It felt too much like the stories her mother used to tell. The ones that always ended with "and they lived happily ever after." Words that had no place in Kayla's real complicated life. That night she ate in her room. Roasted meat and vegetables, bread still warm from the ovens, wine that tasted like summer. Then she slept hard and dreamless, her body finally allowing itself to rest. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Mornings she worked with the objects. Each vision revealed more pieces of the puzzle. Glimpses of Shaw's estate, snippets of conversation, the layout of where Serena was kept. Dorian was always there, catching her when she stumbled, bringing her water, giving her time to recover between readings. He never pushed, never demanded more than she could give. Afternoons she explored the castle, the library where ancient texts lined floor-to-ceiling shelves, the gardens where things grew despite the mountain cold, the training yards where she watched warriors spar with a grace that seemed almost like dancing. And throughout it all, she felt Dorian's presence, not hovering, but aware, like part of him was always tracking where she was, making sure she was safe. Evenings were hers usually, but on the third night she found him on the battlements staring out at the darkening forest. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, joining him at the wall. Thinking he didn't look at her, but she felt his awareness shift. "We know where Serena is now. Shaw's eastern estate is 3 days' ride. I'm planning the approach. How many men? What route? How to extract her without alerting Shaw before we're ready. You think he'll run? I think he'll kill her before he lets me take her." Dorian's hands clenched on the stone. If he realizes we know, if he suspects we're coming, he'll eliminate the evidence. "So, you need the element of surprise?" "Yes." Kayla studied his profile. "You're afraid?" "Of course, I'm afraid." His voice was rough. "She's all I have left of my family. If I fail again, you won't." "You don't know that." "You're right," Kayla said. "But I know you won't stop trying. I've seen it in every vision." "Dorian." "Serena survived because she knew you were looking. Because she believed you'd come." He finally looked at her and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest ache. "What if I'm too late?" "You're not. I saw her days ago. She's alive and she's waiting." Dorian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cooped her cheek. The touch was gentle, reverent, and the bond between them flared bright. "I'm trying very hard not to ask you to stay," he said quietly. "After the 7 days, I'm trying to respect your choice, to give you the freedom I promised." "But Kayla," his thumb brushed her cheekbone. "I've never felt anything like this. Never wanted anything the way I want you. Not for what you can do, but for who you are." Her heart skipped. "I'm a barmaid with a dangerous gift. We don't fit. You're everything." The words were fierce, almost angry in their intensity. "You're brave and strong, and you don't back down, even when you're terrified. You could have refused to help. Could have run the moment you learned what I was, but you stayed. You faced the visions even though they hurt you." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "You're the person I didn't know I was looking for. And we fit," he continued, his voice dropping to something raw. "Maybe not in the way the court expects or the way it looks on paper, but here," he pressed his hand over his heart. "Here, we fit perfectly. Kayla, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The conviction in his voice made her chest ache. Made her want to believe him so badly it hurt. "Dorian, I know. 7 days and you're free. I'm not taking back my promise." His hand dropped from her face. "I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, I need you to know that this is real for me." She wanted to step back, protect herself the way she'd learned to do over the years. But the moonlight caught the silver in his eyes, made them luminous and vulnerable in a way that stole her breath. His hair was tasseled from running his hands through it, falling across his forehead and his mouth. She'd been trying not to stare at his mouth for days. Now, the way it softened when he looked at her, the way it had formed her name like something precious. He was beautiful, devastating, and looking at her like she held his entire world in her hands. So instead of stepping back, she rose on her toes and kissed him. Dorian went rigid with surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her back like he'd been holding his breath for days, and she was his first gasp of air. Gentle, but urgent, his lips soft against hers, his hands trembling slightly where they pressed against her back like he couldn't quite believe she was real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kayla pressed her forehead to his chest. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "I don't know if I can be what you need." "You don't have to be anything but yourself." His voice was rough. "That's all I want. What if myself isn't enough?" Dorian pulled back just enough to tilt her chin up. "You will always be more than enough. You're everything." She wanted to believe him, but the fear was still there, that she'd wake up one day and he'd realize she was just a barmaid who could touch things and see their past. That the bond had tricked them both into feeling more than was really there. "Ask me again," she said, "after we find Serena, after the 7 days, ask me to stay and I'll think about it." A ray of hope flickered across his face. "I can work with that." She smiled despite herself. "Don't get too confident." "Wouldn't dream of it." He kissed her forehead soft and sweet. "Come on. It's cold out here." He walked her back to her room, his hand warm in hers, their fingers intertwined like they'd been doing this for years. At her door, he turned her to face him, backing her gently against the wood. He kissed her once more, slow and deep, his body a line of heat against hers, his hand cradling her jaw like she was something infinitely precious. When he pulled away, they were both breathing hard. "Good night, Kayla," he said, his voice rough with restraint. Then he left quickly before she could find the courage to invite him in. Kayla leaned against the closed door, her heart racing, her lips still tingling, wondering what the hell she was doing and why she already missed him. On the 5th day, everything went wrong. Kyla was reading the last object, a piece of parchment with Shaw's seal, when the vision hit her harder than any before. Shaw's study, dark wood, heavy curtains, the smell of old books, and older secrets. Shaw himself, gay-haired and distinguished, speaking to a man in travel-stained clothes. The king grows suspicious. His guest has been too effective at gathering information. The man, should we move the girl? Shaw considers. No. Moving her creates risk, but we should eliminate the guest. Make it look like an accident. The king will be devastated, distracted. We'll have the opening we need. Kayla came out of the vision, gasping. Dorian, he was already there studying her. What did you see? Shaw knows about me, about what I can do. He's planning to. Her voice broke. He's coming after me. He'll make it look like an accident. Dorian's expression went cold and lethal. When soon? I don't know exactly. She gripped his arms. But Dorian, he said you've been distracted. That eliminating me would give him an opening. An opening for what? A coup. Dorian's voice was flat. I think he's been game planning this for years. Took Serena to keep me occupied, to weaken my position. And then, if I'm grief-stricken over losing you, he looked at her and she saw fear beneath his icy exterior. You're not staying here. I'm sending you away tonight with guards. Don't do that. Kayla, no. She repeated firmly. If I run, Shaw wins. He gets to keep Serena. Keep his plans. You'll be fighting enemies on all sides without knowing who to trust. I'd rather fight blind than lose you. The words hit her square in the chest. You're not going to lose me, but we need to be smart about this. Smart would be keeping you safe. Smart would be using me as bait. Kayla's mind raced. Shaw thinks I don't know. That's an advantage. We let him make his move, catch him in the act, then we have proof of treason. His hands framed her face. I won't use you as bait. I won't risk you like that. It's my choice to risk. And it's my choice to protect you. His eyes were fierce. You think I could stand there and watch you walk into danger? Watch him try to hurt you and do nothing? You'd be ready to intervene, Dorian. What if I'm not fast enough? His voice cracked. What if something goes wrong and I lose you? Kayla's heart clenched. She'd never seen him like this. The iron control stripped away, leaving raw fear in its place. You won't lose me, she said softly. I'm harder to kill than I look. That's not funny, Kayla. I'm not joking. She covered his hands with hers. But I am serious about this. We have one chance to save Serena and stop Shaw. If we run now, we lose both. Dorian closed his eyes, wearing with himself. If we do this, you don't leave my sight. Not for a second. Agreed. And at the first sign of real danger, you run. You don't argue. You don't hesitate. You run. And you let me handle Shaw. That's not negotiable. His eyes opened, storm gray and uncompromising. I need to know you'll be safe. Please. Okay, I promise. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I'm going to end him, he said against her hair, for taking my sister, for threatening you, for every moment of fear he's caused. I know. You should be horrified by that. I'm not. And she wasn't. Kayla had never been drawn to ruthless tactics, but right now, with danger circling, all she felt was grateful for his protection. I trust you. Dorian pulled back to look at her. Say that again. I trust you. Something in his expression cracked open. All that careful control shattering. He kissed her hard, desperate, pouring everything he couldn't say into it. His fingers tangled in her hair, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss, and she melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt to pull him closer. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, they were shaking, his forehead pressed to hers, his thumb tracing her swollen bottom lip. Kayla, he breathed, and her name sounded like a prayer. After this is over, after Serena is home and Shaw is dealt with and you've had time to breathe, I'm going to ask you properly. Court you the way you deserve. You're that confident I'll say yes. His smile was crooked, vulnerable. No, but I'm that determined to prove I'm worth the risk. Shaw made his move the next evening. Kyla was in the library, Dorian nearby, but giving her space as agreed when a servant brought tea. The girl was young, nervous, and Kayla almost didn't catch it. But there was something in the way she set down the cup. Too careful, too deliberate. Kayla reached for the tea, letting her fingers brush the porcelain. Shaw's voice put it in her evening tea. Wolf's bane enough to stop her heart. Make sure the king finds her. The grief will be useful. Kayla set down the cup without drinking. Thank you, she told the servant girl, who fled with relief clear on her face. Dorian was at her side instantly. Poisoned Wolf's bane. His jaw tightened. He moved faster than expected. Or we're running out of time. Kayla stood. We need to go tonight. If Shaw's desperate enough to poison me in your own castle, he's planning something bigger. Dorian was already moving, calling for Rafe. Within minutes, the plan was set. They'd ride out within the hour, a small force to avoid detection. Straight to Shaw's eastern estate. They assembled in the courtyard as the sun set. 20 warriors, all people Dorian trusted absolutely. Kylo wore borrowed leathers, more practical than her dress, and felt the weight of a knife at her belt. She didn't know if she could use it, but having it helped. Dorian pulled her aside before they mounted. Last chance to stay here. I can leave guards. She took his hand. We do this together. He nodded, then turned to his warriors. Shaw has taken something that belongs to me. Tonight, we're taking her back, and anyone who stands in our way answers to me. The ride was hard and fast. They traveled through the night, stopping only to rest the horses. Dorian stayed close to Kayla the entire time, one hand always within reach. Dawn was breaking when they reached Shaw's estate. A sprawling manor house surrounded by gardens and guards. Too many, Rafe muttered. We'll have to fight through. No, we don't. Kayla pointed to the eastern wing. That's where she is. I saw it in the visions. If we can get in through the servants' entrance, Dorian studied the building. It could work. Rafe, take half the men and create a distraction at the main gate. We'll slip in through the back. It almost worked. They made it inside, moving through empty corridors toward the eastern wing. Kyla could feel Serena's presence. That strange pull her gift gave her toward objects she'd touched. Closer. Closer. Then Shaw stepped out of the shadows, flanked by a dozen armed men. Your Majesty. Shaw's smile was cold. I wondered when you'd figure it out. Dorian moved in front of Kyla instantly. Where is she? Safe for now. Shaw's eyes flicked to Kayla. I see my servant failed in her task. Pity. It would have been cleaner. You're a traitor, Dorian said. You swore loyalty to my father. I served your father for 40 years, watching him make mistake after mistake, and then he died, leaving a boy to rule a kingdom. Shaw's expression hardened. I've spent 3 years cleaning up your messes, watching you chase ghosts instead of governing. It's time for real leadership. By kidnapping a child, by ensuring you remained busy. But you've always been cleverer than I gave you credit for. Found yourself a bloodhound with a gift. Shaw drew his sword. No matter. I'll kill you both. Produce Serena as the grieving sister who escaped her captors and rule as regent until she comes of age. The council will support me. I've made sure of it. Get ready to die first, Dorian said quietly. Shaw laughed. You're outnumbered, Dorian. Surrounded. Your little rescue mission ends here. Then Serena's voice cut through the tension. No, it doesn't. She stepped out from behind Shaw's men, thin, pale, but with fire in her eyes, and she was holding a knife to the throat of one of Shaw's guards. Serena, Dorian breathed. Hi, brother. Her smile was fierce. Sorry I'm late. Had to wait for the right moment. She pressed the knife harder. Everyone drops their weapons or I open his throat. Shaw's face went purple. You little I learned from the best, Serena said. You kept me alive to use as leverage. The guard in her grip whimpered. Shaw looked torn between rage and calculation. That's when Rafe and the other warriors burst through the door behind Shaw's men. Suddenly, the numbers drew even. Shaw realized he was beaten, so he lunged for Serena, a desperate final play. Dorian moved faster than Kayla had ever seen anyone move, intercepting Shaw with brutal efficiency, his fist connected with Shaw's jaw, dropping the older man to the floor. You took my sister, Dorian said, his voice cold as winter. You threatened my mate. You betrayed everything my father believed in. He looked down at Shaw with contempt. You'll stand trial, and if the council finds you guilty, and they will, you'll hang. Shaw spat blood. You can't prove anything. Actually, Kayla stepped forward. I can. She pulled out a small leather journal, one she'd taken from Shaw's desk during the confrontation. Everything's in here. Dates, payments, correspondence with the Blackwater Pack, every detail of your conspiracy. She'd seen it in her vision, had known exactly where to look. The evidence is compelling. Shaw's face went ashen gray. Take him, Dorian growled. Rafe and 2 others hauled Shaw to his feet, binding his hands. Then Dorian turned to Serena. For a long moment, brother and sister just stared at each other. Then Serena dropped the knife and ran into his arms. I knew you'd come, she sobbed into his chest. I knew you'd find me. Dorian held her like she might disappear, his own tears falling freely. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry it took so long. You're here now. Serena pulled back, wiping her eyes. That's what matters. She looked at Kayla, curiosity clear on her face. And you are? Kayla, I helped find you. She did more than help, Dorian said quietly. She saved you. Saved both of us. Serena studied Kayla for a long moment. Then she smiled, genuine, warm. Thank you. I owe you everything. Kyla's throat tightened. I'm just glad you're safe, Serena. The ride back to the castle took 3 days. Serena was weak from her ordeal, and Dorian refused to push her. They camped each night, and Kayla watched them slowly knit back together, talking quietly by the fire. Serena telling stories about her captivity with dark humor that made Dorian wheeze. She's stronger than I remember, Dorian said to Kayla on the second night when Serena had fallen asleep wrapped in furs. She had to be to survive. He stared into the flames. I spent 3 years imagining the worst, and some of it happened. Shaw was cruel in ways I'm only beginning to understand, but she survived it. Found ways to endure. Like someone else I know, Kayla said quietly. Dorian looked at her. I'm nothing special. You kept searching when everyone said to give up. You never stopped believing she was alive. She's here because of you, Dorian. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. It's been 7 days. Kayla's heart skipped. I know. The oath is fulfilled. You're free to go if you want. He said it steadily, but she felt his tension. I'll give you the gold. Help you start over wherever you choose. No strings attached. What if I don't want to go? His breath caught. Then I would very much like you to stay. Kayla thought about the past week, the visions that had drained her, but also the moments in between. Dorian's gentleness when she was exhausted. His fierce protectiveness. The way he looked at her like she hung the moon. The castle that had started to feel like home. The people who'd welcomed her without question. And the bond humming between them, promising something she'd never dared want. I'm still terrified, she admitted, of this, of being a queen. Of everything that comes with choosing you. I understand, but I'm even more terrified of walking away. She met his eyes. Of spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. Dorian's expression transformed. Is that a yes? It's a let's see where this goes. She smiled. Court me properly like you promised. Give me time to figure out what being your mate means. And maybe we'll find our way there together. I can work with maybe. He pulled her close, kissing her soft and deep. I'll court you so thoroughly you'll be sick of me. I doubt that. Just wait. I'm very persistent. She laughed against his mouth. I'm counting on it. 3 months later, Shaw's trial concluded. The evidence was overwhelming. Kayla's testimony, the journal, witnesses who came forward once they knew Shaw couldn't retaliate. The council found him guilty of treason, kidnapping, attempted murder, and conspiracy. He hanged at dawn, and Kyla didn't attend. She'd seen enough of Shaw through her visions. She didn't need to see him die. Instead, she spent the morning in the castle library with Serena, who was slowly recovering. The girl was sharp, funny, and had taken to following Kyla around like a persistent shadow. He really loves you, you know, Serena said, not looking up from her book. Dorian, I've never seen him like this. Like what? Happy. Serena glanced at her. He's always been good at the king part. The duty, the decisions, the weight of the crown. But you make him remember he's also just a man. Someone who deserves softness. Kayla felt her cheeks heat. We're taking things slow. Slow? Serena's tone was skeptical. Is that what we're calling the way he looks at you at dinner? Like you're the only person in the room? He's being respectful, giving me space. He's being an idiot. Serena set down her book. Kyla, I know you're scared, but you should see him when you're not looking. The way his whole face changes when you walk into a room. The way he talks about you to the council. Like you're the smartest, bravest person he's ever met. She paused. Don't make him wait too long. Life's too short. Trust me, I know. Kayla thought about that conversation all day. That evening, she found Dorian on the battlements, their spot now. He smiled when he saw her, and her heart did that stupid fluttering thing it always did. Serena cornered me today, Kayla said, joining him at the wall. Oh no, what did she say? That you're an idiot for going slow? Dorian laughed. She's not wrong, but I meant what I said. I want to do this right. What if I'm done going slow? He went very still. Kayla, I love you, she said, the words finally breaking free. I think I've loved you since that first night in the pub when you said please like you'd forgotten how. And I'm done being afraid of it. Dorian turned to her, his eyes bright. Say that again. I love you, Dorian, and I want to stay. Not for 7 days or 3 months, but for always, if you'll have me. He kissed her breathless, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. When he set her down, both of them were laughing. Marry me, he said. Bond with me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice. Yes. She didn't hesitate. Yes to all of it. From somewhere below, Serena's voice drifted up. Finally. They both laughed and Dorian pulled Kayla close. Fair warning, he murmured against her hair. My sister is going to be insufferable about this. I can handle her. I know you can. You can handle anything. He tilted her chin up. You're remarkable, Kayla, and I'm going to spend every day making sure you know it. She kissed him again, softer this time. I'm holding you to that. They stood together as the sun set, wrapped in each other and the bond that had brought them together. Kyla thought about the woman she'd been, afraid, trapped, certain she'd never be free. That woman wouldn't recognize her now. Wouldn't believe this was possible. But it was. All of it. The love, the freedom, the future stretching bright before them. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Kayla let herself age hope. The bonding ceremony was held under the full moon with Serena standing beside them and the entire court as witnesses. Kylo wore deep blue silk that made her eyes glow. And Dorian wore formal leathers marked with his family crest. When they spoke their vows, promising partnership in choice and love freely given, Kayla felt the bond snap fully into place. Not a chain, but a bridge connecting them, yes, but leaving room for each to be whole on their own. Dorian kissed her with such tenderness that she felt tears streak down her cheeks. I choose you, he whispered against her lips. I choose you back, she said. Every day for the rest of our lives. The celebration lasted until dawn. There was music and dancing and toasts that grew increasingly ridiculous as the wine flowed. Serena pulled Kyla onto the dance floor, spinning her around while Dorian watched with a smile that made Kyla's heart full to bursting. Later, much later, they slipped away to their chambers, the rooms that were officially theirs now. Dorian loved her slowly, reverently, making good on every promise he'd ever made. And Kayla loved him back with everything she had, finally believing she deserved this. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight. Tell me something, Dorian said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Something I don't know, Kayla thought for a moment. I used to dream about running away, starting over somewhere no one knew me, where I could be invisible. And now I'm exactly where I want to be. Seen, known, loved. She tilted her head to look at him. You gave me freedom, and I used it to choose you. Dorian's expression softened. You gave me something, too. What's that? Hope. The belief that I could have this real love, real partnership after everything I'd lost. He kissed her forehead. You're my second chance, Kayla, and I'm never taking it for granted. She pressed closer, feeling safe and cherished and home. Your turn. Tell me something I don't know. I knew you were special that first night, he admitted. Before I knew about your gift, before the bond, just watching you work. The way you moved, the way you treated every drunk with dignity, even when they didn't deserve it. I thought, she's someone who survived things, but didn't let them make her cruel. And I wanted to know you. Just wanted to know me. Well, he conceded with a smile. Wanting to know you quickly became wanting you, but I tried to be cool about it. She laughed. You failed spectacularly. I really did. They fell into comfortable silence. Outside, the celebration continued, muted by distance, but still audible. The pack was happy for them. Kayla had been accepted fully, not just as Dorian's mate, but as one of them. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we live, Dorian said simply. We help Serena heal. We strengthen the kingdom. We deal with whatever challenges come. He pulled her closer. And we love each other through all of it. Is it that simple? I hope so. Kayla closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear, the visions, the choices that had seemed impossible. And she thought about Roger's pub, where this had all started. The corner booth, where a stranger had asked for one last drink and changed her life forever. Thank you, she whispered, for asking. That night in the pub, for giving me a choice when you could have just taken what you needed. Dorian's arms tightened around her. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Best decision I ever made. Second best, he corrected. The first was kissing me on the battlements. She swatted his chest lightly and his laugh rumbled through both of them. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. The bond humming between them and the future spread out before them like a gift. Kayla had closed the pub that night, expecting nothing more than another shift ending. Instead, she'd found a king who saw her worth, a sister who became family, and a love that finally felt like home. She'd poured him one last drink, and he'd given her the world. Fair trade, she thought as sleep claimed her. Do you like this story? Were you moved by the spirit of the male and female protagonists? And if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people hear these stories.